Welcome to the Mindset RX podcast. My name is Tom Foxley and I help functional athletes gain a champ's mindset. Almost forgot what I said at the start of every single podcast. Literally, 50 podcasts I've said that and I almost forgot. Anyway, today's podcast has a kind of the potential to go down a self-therapy session, which I'm going to try and avoid for you. And it may be reminiscent of me lying on a couch expressing my deepest, darkest fears to you guys. But there's a reason I'm going down this route. And this reason is essentially that you guys may look to me maybe, or to other people in the mindset world and think that we've got it all sorted. Or you may look at yourself and think you've hit a level in mindset or you've hit a level in performance, and that's all like that's good. You're good now. You don't have to worry about it. Or you may feel like you're stuck, and no matter what you try, you can't move forwards. Or you may just be curious about the whole mindset world anyway. The reason I'm telling you this is because there's layers to this shit. There's layers to the world of mindset, and the further into this I go, the harder it gets to peel back those layers. But I want to reassure you that wherever you were on that scale that I just mentioned, from like thinking everyone else has got it sorted, to yourself feeling like you're stuck, to like all those options, wherever you are in there, there's more layers to go, and there's always more layers to go. I think in there's a Buddhist piece, or there was a Buddhist reference, and I can probably completely butchering this, as you can tell. My knowledge of the religious side of this isn't on point, but there's a necklace essentially that a lot of Hindus and Buddhists carry around, and it's 186 I think beads, and they each represent a different level of awareness, and I'm probably like 6 beads in on this, so don't expect any wisdom Buddha-like wisdom from me, but I think I can kind of give a good perspective to where you guys are coming from, and where you want to go. So let's get this thing started. I recently went through what could be probably described as another peeling back of the layers. I have been working for a while just on my mindset work. I think I've been doing mindset work for probably a total personally of 5, maybe 6 years now in some degree. From meditation to kind of more spiritual things, like just trying to test the water there. None of that kind of really worked, or the religious side of it anyway. I didn't go crazy going to different places, but I was curious about it, but none of it really worked for me. From reading all kinds of material to being a complete non-believer of this stuff, and I've gone through all these layers, and quite recently I've peeled back another layer, and it's probably the most revealing layer that I've had yet, and it came with complete insight. But let's talk about how I got to that point first. So those of you who don't know my story, I had the shit kicked out of me at school for most of my school career. Is that the right word? Time at school. Anyway, I had the shit kicked out of me at school for almost all the time. Like I'd turn up and have the shit kicked out of me. I'd go to school on the bus and have the shit kicked out of me. Lunchtime, I'd have the shit kicked out of me, and it'd be a horrible kind of cycle of bullying essentially. So I had a really crappy time, and what I didn't realize at the time is that I began to, because of influence, put on certain layers in front of me, like protective shells, and I layered them up and layered them up and layered them up. And as I was putting these on top, like as I was laying them up, I thought I was creating the most effective defense mechanism there were. And for the time it works, and this is the way that a lot of our coping mechanisms work. This is the way a lot of our bound nature essentially comes about, because we are always adding these extra layers in, and they work for a certain amount of time. They fulfill a purpose. Like the non-emotional side that develops, the shutting myself off to emotion and to openness and vulnerability, it worked for a while. It stopped me feeling so hurt from bullying. It stopped me feeling so hurt and rejected in terms of a lot of other things, and it worked. And it got me through the time not without feeling sad, but without going completely off the fucking edge, which was probably a benefit to some degree. And don't get me wrong, like at that time, I would definitely describe myself as having anxiety at some point, or being an anxious person. Like I'd be in that category, and also depressive as well, which are two things that don't really go hand in hand. So I was in a fucking awful place at that point. I remember most of my days when I was 15 or 16 were just filled with tears. Like I was in a really shitty place, whether that was tears by myself or tears by tears like in a public place. It would mostly be by myself though, and I'd mostly be kind of like upset in a shitty place. Because of this, I became athletically inferior to everyone else, is probably the best way to put it. I stopped opening up to people, and because of that I stopped wanting to express any weakness on a football pitch or athletically, and I held myself back. I found solace and comfort in video games and by myself and playing guitar. And like, not that playing guitar was a bad thing, but I just sat in my room for hours playing guitar. And as a human being and an athlete, I retreated within myself. I found like comfort in almost hatred, I think is probably the word to put this, a disgust and a despising for everyone else in the world. And like, you may be listening to this thinking, that doesn't sound like you, Tom. That doesn't sound like the person you are. But I promise you, that was me. Like I was so almost, I think loathing is probably the best phrase. Like loathing at everyone else because I was subconsciously loathing myself. It makes sense. And this may be getting a bit kind of deep and heavy, but I think it's an important thing to say. Like this is where I've come from. This is the process that I've been through in this. So I went through this phase, and then those of you who've heard me talk about my story have been introduced to two things: a man called Bear, who was a Royal Marines Commando, and a book called Bounce. And the book called Bounce started to kind of talk me through the 10,000 hour rule, and the idea that if I worked hard, I'd probably get where I wanted to be. And until this point, I had a completely fixed mindset. I was sure, 100% sure, that if like, or at that point, I was sure that there's no change in me. There's no possibility to change me. I was who I was because this is what I've been told my whole life. Like, you are a sensitive person. You are this type of person. You are that type of person. And kind of implicitly by others at school and the rejection, you are a loser. You are going to be by yourself. Like, you are unpopular. This side of things. So more layers went on until I got to this point called this book called Bounce, and that book, it started to unravel a few of these stories, just like the first layer. Probably, if you imagine this like an onion, there's just the first layer, and then at the same time, this guy that I listened to, Bear, the guy that I worked with, Royal Marines Commando, he began to talk to me about the Royal Marines. Now this is where it gets interesting. I thought at that point that I had uncovered a layer, but the truth was I found another way to put a layer on. I thought that by being tougher and by proving myself to be a bigger man and to be physically capable of anything, and choosing to prove myself as more than anyone else, I could show these people, and more importantly, I could show myself that I was bigger and better, and by becoming a Royal Marines Commando. And so that was it. It was a proof to myself that I wasn't the weak person that I feared I was. And what I ended up doing here is adding on this extra layer of kind of toughness, a veneer of toughness. And I imagine it like a suit of armor. I imagine it back then like this feeble kind of young guy in a big suit of armor trying to appear bigger than he actually was. And this is what I did for so long. And this realization, and what that did as well is it added to this story of of superiority to everyone. Like, I was going to be better than everyone else. I proved it. I earned a bit of green felt to put on my head, and completed some of the toughest military training. So therefore, I was better than everyone else, and it added to this level of superiority to everyone else. Ironically, it also added to the subconscious feeling of inferiority. I felt that I wasn't as good as anyone in training. I felt that I just scraped through. I felt that I wasn't good enough to be there, and I felt imposter syndrome the whole time I was there. But at the same time, I experienced some massive growth. I experienced some confidence. I experienced some other layers. And so you can see it's this give and take of mindset. I was growing, but also putting more layers on at the same time. And this is one of the, by the way, just as a side note, one of the big problems I have with the kind of the motivational industry as a whole. The fact that, like, especially with young guys, where they're encouraged to be a real man and just turn up and like go to these things where they have bare knuckle boxing fights at the end, and just like screaming and shouting, and it's like a big bro love fest, and like this is part of the problem. You're putting a veneer on. You're generally not uncovering stuff, and it may work for some people, but I don't think it works for the majority of people. Is putting a layer on top of, like, it's like putting a plaster on top of like a huge leg wound. It just doesn't do anything. So anyway, I developed all these, or carried on developing these layers of inferiority and superiority, and it was only really a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, that I really realized this huge point here, this huge mass of superiority and inferiority. And I talk about bound nature roles, so I imagine that I'd began to play this role, and this is like a creation of myself to protect myself from who I really am. And I call this guy, like, it's a role that I act. So you got to imagine an actor acting a role. This is essentially what I was doing. I was acting a role of this guy that I called Ian the Invincible, because it trivializes it and it separates it from me. So Ian the Invincible is like this guy, like I was talking about, the guy in the suit of armor who builds out suit of armor, but it didn't allow me to become vulnerable. It stopped me being vulnerable. It created this armor that I created. It was like this defense mechanism that I built up, and it not only stopped like hurt from coming in, which ironically it didn't, but I thought it did, but it stopped my true self coming out. And that was the biggest thing that I did. Like that was the, like, noticing it, just like, it was like I was journaling in a coffee shop, and I was like, oh shit, this is what I've been doing for so long. And I realized how it'd been limiting me in performance, how it'd been limiting me as a business owner, as Mindset RX kind of head coach and founder. I realized how it'd been limited me in my relationships and my friendships and all this kind of stuff. So I'll touch on the training side of it, because I think this is useful for you. But this feeling of superiority that I had meant that if I ever lost at jiu-jitsu, I would seethe and tell myself that they got lucky, instead of opening up to my own possibilities of like, kind of, I don't know, maybe not being as good as them. Like, I wouldn't admit that I wasn't as good as someone, or that they'd done something better than me. So there's that side. And it also, like, when I was at CrossFit, like, or doing much more CrossFit as well, it led to comparing myself to other people. So I'd look around and compare myself to everyone, and then if they beat me, it would carry on. Like, I would carry on thinking, oh yeah, I'm better than them somehow, but increasing the inferiority that I actually felt. It's a strange kind of thing to have going on. And then the other side of it as well was when I was coaching more, especially in the previous CrossFit gym that I was working at, when I was coaching a lot more and also training, like, specifically in CrossFit, I found that I wouldn't train hard with members. I'd always hold back, because I'd be scared about being vulnerable and showing them just how unfit I really was, or how unstrong I really was. So I'd avoid all my weaknesses and in that side. So my current objectives with mindset are reducing this inferiority and reducing the superiority, because ironically I feel superior to people, which is ridiculous, because intellectually I understand, but internally there's still some resistance there. And then there's the inferiority as well. Like, there's so many people in the world that I feel inferior to. And I think this is part of life, and I think that knowing this is part of life, but I'm working on that. And then there's the vulnerability part as well. Like, just becoming vulnerable with people is a really hard thing for a lot of us to do, whether it's in a CrossFit workout, or whether it is asking a coach for advice, or whether it's accepting help. Like, I would reject help for so long because I felt that I couldn't appear weak in front of people or appear vulnerable. It also shows up as like this fear of losing everything. So like, Mindset RX is growing to this incredible level at the moment, but I still fear losing everything. And I'm sure you guys have felt this to some degree too. Like, you have so much, like, what if I lose it all? And like, the human mind is conditioned to feel like that. So it's a very, very hard place to be. It's to kind of encourage you to, like, your human evolution, it encourages you to feel a bit like that. I also find that it stops me interacting with human beings. So this is also something that I'm trying to work on. I'm trying to put myself out there, like being vulnerable to you guys too. As you can probably tell by my lack of prose and ease of conversation, this hasn't been the easiest podcast for me to record. It's been tough to kind of get it out, and I think I garbled quite a lot of it. So trying to put myself out there, my authentic me out there, is something that I'm doing to help myself, but also to show you that there's layers to this shit. Yeah, you go through one layer at a time, and you progress and progress and progress and progress. And this is a level of discomfort that I'm going to go through, and I hope that you can probably see that this discomfort is good for me. And all this is a quest to do is lead to who I truly am, and that is the fundamental lesson of this. As we go through life, we have influence on us that create stories like I spoke about in the last thing. These stories come out in our behaviors, our emotions, our physical symptoms, and our thoughts. And all of these lead to behaviors and actions, and then ultimately whether we're successful or unsuccessful. So it's only by changing this mindset that we can change the outcome in a long-term way, or in a long-term success way. So this is a quest to find who I really am, and this is a process, and because you and I have our free nature, which is fundamentally who we are. It's the best part of you, where everything feels easy and you're not straining for everything, and everything just feels good. And this is a process of removing that influence until you find that, until you can be that unashamedly and unapologetically be you. And that is the fundamental lesson of this. Remove these layers. See that almost everything you do is a product of influence, and learn to put the space in between you and your influence. Learn to separate it from who you are, because who you are right now and who you are going to be are two very, very different things. And if we learn to remove that influence, remove the stories, we can become essentially our best version of ourselves. And this is what this is about. This is about self-actualizing. So hopefully this has been helpful. I've no idea whether it has or not, whether 20 minutes or so of me rambling has been helpful for you. But if it has, I'd love to see some 5-star reviews on iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcast, all that kind of stuff. And if you are listening to this for the first time and you're not in the free Facebook group for Mindset RX listeners and people who are interested in Mindset RX, you can go to Facebook and search for Mindset RX, and it will come up there, or Mindset for Functional Athletes. That's probably the best thing to search. I'll also put a link in the bottom in these kind of podcast notes, so click that, or go to facebook.com. I can't believe I'm so uncool that I keep on saying facebook.com. Use the app like someone in the 21st century. So go to Facebook and search for Mindset RX, and you can follow me all those kind of ways, and make sure you're following the story on Instagram, which is @TomFoxley, and I'll speak to you very soon.